Is the Americans going to basically leave Syria now to the rebels? No way on earth. The rebels are sincere, but they don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. Why did the Assad regime not protect itself? Anybody who thinks that the Islam and the Muslims will reign over Syria because of this revolution, they're mythical. People need to stop basically making Erdogan as if he's the next caliph. Basically, sometimes we win the revolution on the ground by toppling a regime, but we lose the political and the strategic outcome. The spirit of confrontation of evil have been built in every Syrian man and woman. This mindset is what can create of the Syrian people the best nation on planet Earth.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is a momentous day. Bashar al-Assad is gone and out of Syria. Lots of things that we want to discuss and understand, because why did the Iranians pack up so quickly? Why didn't they support the Bashar al-Assad regime? How come the Russians exited very fast? What's happening with Israel? Are they trying to expand into Syria? They're striking Damascus. So many things are happening. What's the plan with the rebels? What is next? We're going to discuss on today's episode of i3 Pulse. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Allah barak fik. Alhamdulillah, it's a great day. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We can say really Allahu Akbar, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this amazing victory to the Syrian people, to the Muslims in Syria. They got rid of this tyrant, I guess. Who can't celebrate really? And thousands and thousands of prisoners were freed after years and years and years. There's people who spent over 40 years in jail, a'udhu billah, in dungeons underground, and there's scenes of some of these prisoners that a'udhu billah looks like more of one brother said like a horror movie. Maybe we can pull that up inshallah and just show some of that. And it's really horrific. A'udhu billah.
Just stuck
You see, this is why people are celebrating. That's why basically the Syrian people, because they know all this stuff. There's thousands of people underground in underground dungeons with like secret doors. Imagine thousands and tens of thousands. Numbers of 350,000 people are the number of prisoners in Syria.
Sheikh, this is a big thing for the Ummah, for the people of Syria, and alhamdulillah, we're very happy about this. But now, want to jump right in and kind of understand what's going on, because there's a lot of things that just surprise everybody. Iran didn't come to the rescue. A lot of people expected Iran to come to the rescue. The Iraqi militias were trying to move into Syria as well. The Americans pushed them back. Russia packed up. The rebels advanced to Damascus in 12 days when the whole thing took 13 years, 9 months. What is going on here? What happened?
Wallahi, look, people need to understand the geopolitical, entanglement. The United States have influence over most of these countries, if not all of them, right? So Iran have supported the Assad regime for years and years and years. And it's the bloodline between Iran and Hezbollah. So they can see basically this relationship has been cut off. This is a huge strategic loss for Iran. How come they didn't support them? How come they didn't send their militias? How come? I mean, the Iraqis tried, the Shia Iraqi militias tried, and the United States came and smashed them. So you can see that the United States has an interest in getting the rebels to take over Syria. That's number one. Number two, the Iranians understood that the Americans are telling them you need to go back into your little den and not come out for now because we don't want you in Syria. And the Iranians do not want a confrontation, especially with the Trump administration. They're like, okay, we get it. You guys don't want us there. We're not going to support an Assad regime.
Remember what happened to Qasem Soleimani? Donald Trump
definitely. They smashed him, right? Yeah. And this was a signal. This was a message from the Americans. So this is the alignment. So the Americans have aligned everybody before they allowed the rebels to move out. Now I'm saying it like that. Yes, the Americans have given a green light for Turkey to let the rebels basically move into their different positions. And what's the proofs for that? I mean, you need to understand the Assad regime was told, you're not going to be supported by us anymore. You need to pack your bag and go to Russia. And even the Russians were told to basically pack up and go. By who? Who can push the Russians around? The Americans. There's nobody else. Why did the Russians just packed up and are at least leaving right now? Why didn't they resist? Why didn't they protect the regime? It's so much resource intensive. That's number one. So they have to ship basically. So they don't have enough soldiers for Ukraine. But let's say that at least they would have supported by air bombings and so forth. You know what's going to happen if they did that and they resisted the American push outside Syria? The Americans could have done to them exactly what they've done to them in Ukraine and what they've done to them in Afghanistan, 40 years ago, whatever the number is. They could easily basically give weapons to some of the rebels and they bomb the hell out of the Russian air bases and naval ports. The Russians do not want to be humiliated like that. They'll look really, really bad. I mean, like the Ukraine has a big military and it's a pretty advanced country compared to Syria, and all of Europe is supporting Ukraine. So like, and still the Russians are humiliated. Imagine basically the rebels come and smash them. They will not be able to resist. They don't have the logistics and the capacity to support their mission in Syria. You see what I'm saying? So that's number one. Number one, the Americans pushed the Russians out. What people need to understand also that the Americans brought the Russians in the first place. So there's total synchronization within that area. The Russians, if they've been able, they could have maybe pushed to stay there because they would want a foothold in the Middle East. Putin wants a foothold in the Middle East, but the Americans have all the power within that area from a geostrategic perspective. You see what I'm saying? So why did the Americans invite the Russians in the first place? Because this revolution, unlike the Egyptian and the Tunisian one, which could have been, supported from the beginning or sparked or initiated maybe by Western support, the Syrian Revolution of 2011 was fully homegrown, was fully by the Syrian people, period. Okay? The Americans did not expect this revolution to happen.
So what makes this, you say that the Americans did not expect this one and the other ones were more expected. Like what makes Syria different?
Well, because Syria is way different. The amount of atrocities that the Assad regime have done in Syria, from their perspective, they tamed everybody.
Yes.
That we go back to 1982 with Hama.
Yes.
The city of Hama was a Muslim Brotherhood stronghold. So they basically kind of, you can say, opposed the regime. And the regime, Hama had 200,000 people, okay? 200 or 250,000 people max in that city. Hafiz al-Assad, the father of Bashar, came in and killed 40,000 in within few days. Okay, probably maybe max like 3-4 weeks. And 17,000 people were disappeared, never to seen afterwards. That's literally 25% of the city. So after that incident, everybody said, okay, no more, religious activism, no more political activism of any sort.
People ran away, people gave up, people were either killed
like
or arrested.
We've just seen that some of these prisons have like tens and hundreds of thousands of prisoners. And I still remember at the beginning of the 2011 revolution, the Assad regime said, yeah, bring it on, try to basically have such a revolution here in Syria. We'll crush it. They were so arrogant, subhanAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala flipped things against them. It took 13 years for their demise, but alhamdulillah, it did happen. So when the Syrian regime historically is definitely super allied to the United States, it's a proxy to the United States. That's how Hafiz al-Assad came into being in the first place in 1970, with the support of the Americans. It was a coup against another president in Syria. The Americans were definitely against the revolution. They wanted to nip it from the bud, as they say, and that's why they used multiple ways to abort it. Number one, these defectors from the Syrian army and the civilians who were part of the revolution, these factions, were infiltrated by the Arab regimes and the Turkish regimes. The Turkish intelligence and the Arab regimes came in to build, to really kind of to create lots of dependency, and to push basically people that you can say are trusted by these regimes to take over. And when you do that, you manipulate and you divert the mission, because the mission, as we said, was really this is civilian-based revolution. It was a sincere revolution to get rid of the tyranny in Syria. What does that mean? That risks American interest in the region. The Syrian regime was very important for Syria, for the United States, and therefore this revolution really risked all the American interest.
So quick, just so I can make sure that we're all following here. Just in one line, Syria was important because where it's located is right beside Israel.
Not just Israel, it's in the middle of the Middle East. I mean, Turkey would be affected, Lebanon will be affected, Iraq will be affected, Jordan will be affected, Israel will be affected.
Yes. So that's why Syria is important. Now, as for the Americans being against the revolution in the beginning, I remember even Barack Obama, though, he was talking about how they were just wanting to find the right rebel group to support, and they were talking against Assad, and we want Assad gone, we want Assad gone. And
my policy from the beginning has been that President Assad had lost credibility, that he attacked his own people, has killed his own people, unleashed a military against innocent civilians, and that the only way to bring stability and peace to Syria is going to be for Assad to step down and to move forward on a political transition.
Hillary Clinton saying that they're good rebels and all this stuff. How does that square with that they were against the revolution? Because it seems like they were also trying to support it and being against. Their rhetoric was very anti-Bashar.
Yeah, well, as you can see, basically, if the Americans support the rebels, they'll just smash the regime within hours. They promised these Free Syrian Army factions, and they didn't give them the support that they needed, which basically led Bashar al-Assad and the Iranians and the Russians and the Iraqi militias and Hezbollah in Lebanon to crush them. So that's number one. Number two, as we said, basically these factions were literally manipulated, or at least they infiltrated, and these intelligence agencies that promised them support and supplies and so forth, they would put conditions on that support and supply. The funding, if somebody gives you funding, they're going to put conditions. And even in a business, like you have an investor, you can say, look, this is the conditions. I'm going to put my money based upon these. So these conditions they created lots of inter-faction fighting between them. So that's number two. So number one, we said, it invited Iran to come support. They did not block them as they blocked them right now. They invited the Iraqi militias. The Americans could have easily basically bombed them and khalas, done. No, the Americans allowed it. The Americans invited Russia to come in basically at one point in time because even Hezbollah and Iran and the Iraqi militias, so Iranian, Iraqi, Lebanese militias couldn't save the regime from the people.
Yes, I remember was it Qasem Soleimani, he visited Russia, was it? I believe, or somebody visited Russia from Iran's side, and then Vladimir Putin went. So does that, where does America come into that? Like, maybe they could have allowed it, but does it mean that it was them that decided to involve them? Like,
without a doubt, because at the end of the day, as you can see, the Americans allowed the Iranians to be there in the first place. So definitely the Iranians are not going to go to Putin and just make demands. The one who basically can allow the Russians into the Middle East, and this was important for Putin to have a foothold in the Middle East, was the Americans. Because the Americans really, from a world power perspective, have the most influence in the region. So the one who would allow the Russians to make a move was the Americans. As we said, they could from the beginning they could have stopped it, but they needed the Russian planes to bomb the rebels because the Americans, when they speak to the rebels, they're trying to tell them we're friends and we're buddies. You see what I'm saying? And the Americans orchestrated all the rebels in the south on the Jordanian border. This is known to everybody, right? There was American centers there, training centers and so forth, run by the Americans. Also on the Bukamal, in the areas adjacent to Iraq, also the Americans basically, until now, the Natif region basically was a Free and Sea army that are trained by the Americans, those two. Also, the Americans took the Kurds. They took the Kurds fully and they trained them and then gave them all the support that they have. So the Kurds in the northeast are also under American influence. These are facts. What about the rest of the factions? The rest of the Syrian faction, there are two types. There's the nationalist ones, which is really mostly the Free Syrian Army. There's the Islamic ones. The Islamic ones, we're not discussing HTS here. We're not discussing HTS or ISIL. We're discussing just regular Muslim factions that were created. So what does that mean, Muslims? Meaning basically they have Islamic goals, let's say. Understand? Those two were left for the Turks to come and align them. And with the Turkish support and training and everything else, as you can see, basically they're aligned. Both of them basically are under the umbrella of the SNA, the Syrian National Army. Who's overseeing the SNA? Fully the Turks. Fully. Okay? Turkey is aligned with the United States because Turkey cannot go against the U.S. interest in Syria. Okay? The only red line that the Turks have is that the Kurds. That's why the United States did not arm the Kurds so much that they can take over the rebels, because that would basically go against the Turkish interest. So there was aligned. Erdogan literally fully aligned with American interests, because the United States is not going to allow Turkey to fully take over Syria. Nobody's going to allow that. The Americans are not going to allow that, and the Israelis are not going to allow that. So Erdogan knows, look, I'm not going to compete with the Americans on this. I'm just going to serve their interests because they can serve mine, and there's back and forth. You know what I'm saying? Like, some people, fishermen will be selling fish, and they might want basically some wheat in return from the farmers.
Yes.
It's literally an exchange.
Like the Turkish government is utilizing the Syrians as a
card.
Negotiations.
Yes.
Negotiation for what? As a card to do what?
Well, to serve the Americans. They serve the Americans with this card, and they get something in return. What is it in return? For example, the Americans could say, look, we can arm the Kurds and make a huge problem for you. So the Turks say, hey, look, how can we basically negotiate this? How can we help you out so you don't do that? So say, look, then you need to basically take these rebels, align them upon our interests, so we don't arm the Kurds. This is the back and forth right there. You understand? Doesn't even have to go outside. Sometimes there's negotiations that are secretive behind the scenes for other things. It could be economical, could be a different country, could be has to do with Armenia, Azerbaijan, or the NATO or the EU. It could be a million things. But in this situation, you can see basically the back and forth easy. The Americans threatened in Turkey with what Turkey has on their terrorist list, which is the Kurds in Syria. The Americans said, look, we will not going to arm them that much, but you guys need to infiltrate and take full control of the rebels, so Syria can move from our lap to our lap. You see what I'm saying? Basically, keeping Syria within their sphere of influence. The Assad regime, basically, the Americans don't care about them. All these tyrants, basically, since 2007, I saw the first report in the think tanks in Washington, D.C., that these tyrannical, old, archaic regimes have become a liability for Washington. And that means, that's why basically the United States preemptively started the Arab Spring. And that people might basically take offense to that. Sadly, it is a reality. When Google and Twitter and support the revolutionaries, you know that there's somebody behind these revolutions.
So
now the people are sincere. When the people are moving, they're moving because they want to stand up against tyranny and so forth. The issue is basically sometimes we win the revolution on the ground by toppling a regime, but we lose the political and the strategic outcome. And that renders all the sacrifices as sadly almost as null. Sadly. I'm not saying this about now. I'm not saying this about the Syrian Revolution in specific, but look at the Egyptian one. Every Egyptian that you speak to, you say, look, you know what? Prior to we were better prior to the revolution. Can you believe? Like living back then during that time, who could have even imagined that an Egyptian person would say, "Alhamdulillah for a Mubarak time." They never said it before, but they said it after the revolution because things basically sadly went sideways. Now, we're not saying this happened in Syria, inshallah, it won't, but that's why we need this discussion to create the political awareness so we don't get there. We don't fall into that trap. Because the Americans want the Syrian people to fall into that trap.
So, Sheikh, you said that the American government sees the tyrants as a liability.
Yeah.
I mean, the tyrants seem to be doing everything that America wants, and the Alawis are a minority on top of the majority. It's a perfect need relationship. The tyrants need the Americans. So how come they're a liability for the American government?
They are a liability because there's risk. They were not a liability earlier. They were a net asset before. They're a liability today because after 10 or 30 or 40 years, sometimes 50 years, like this specific regime, people are gonna explode, and that puts the regime at risk of basically imploding. And if it implodes without a prior plan, the whole country could risk basically leaving the sphere of influence of the United States. So, for example, with Mubarak, yes, the Egyptians have had it. And you can see that from the social media. The youngsters are speaking about ousting them and blah, and this and that. So the United States preempted it in Tunisia and in Egypt too, release the energy, release the pressure from the masses and replace them with another tyrant. So the question, are the Americans doing the same thing here? Well, it looks like it's the same plan. And that's why we need to be very aware.
Okay, so Sheikh, one more thing before we talk about the other groups that are part of this whole picture here in Syria. Mentioned that the other Arab Springs were other nations were different than Syria, and that America had a hand in starting it. Isn't necessarily that America had a hand in it, because maybe it's possible that the people got so fed up that they just started exploding, and then America just facilitated because it's like, khalas, continue. Let's see where this goes.
Like in the case of Egypt, for example, there was American activists that gave training to these factions that started the revolution. They had a red line against certain people. For example, I still remember the what's called Sitta April, the April 6th youth movement. That was trained by Americans to lead a revolution and to lead protests. And how do you basically gather people and do these quick protests? Basically, I forgot what they were called. They just they come in and they just leave, disperse very quickly. So lots of American training happened, and there's people who are on the ground from the United States, from think tanks, from like the State Department. There's lots of spies who were there basically, so people know. You understand? So this is number one. Number two is basically all these American tech giants supported the revolution. Facebook, Twitter, Google. They were even basically in Egypt. They set up basically phone lines through digital for people to send messages over the phone to keep Twitter going. So it's the Americans really pushed this to happen, and see, every single human needs to understand that the populace doesn't just move without a leadership. Any type of public movement must have somebody leading it. Thinking that people will just go on the streets and just do it on their own is problematic. Even the Syrian Revolution, they had to create these leadership councils. It's called the tansiqiyat. At the city level and at the province level, and then bit by bit, kind of there was like a national council and so forth. So there has to be some form of leadership to move the masses. You see what I'm saying? Otherwise, things would not at least persist. Maybe people can just go on the streets a couple of times, get beaten up, and leave. But what's going to make you, believe that things needs to come back again, and to organize and to synchronize? So the Americans played a big role in Tunisia and especially in Egypt to make this happen. The Syrian Revolution was a little bit different.
We spoke about how the regime was being utilized a certain way. We spoke about Turkey and the rebel groups, and you're continuing. So I want to,
So we discussed basically the three-pronged strategy of the United States to abort the Syrian Revolution, and now using it to get to let's say a finish line that the United States prefers. So as we said, number one, it utilized the Iranian militias, and Iran and Iranian militias, and the Iraqi militias and Hezbollah to protect the regime, and then added the Russians, inviting them over to do their dirty job by bombing civilians and bombing people from the air. That's one. Number two is utilize the Arab intelligence agencies and the Turkish intelligence to subvert really and manipulate and take really leadership of some of these factions, and then themselves, basically, the Americans did that in the south and in the east from Iraq and Jordan, because they had access to these two places. And they also and they use now, the third thing is basically they armed the Kurds to also take over certain areas and fight certain factions. But more importantly, they created the ISIS and the Jabhat al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda affiliate. Both of those were created by the United States, by the CIA. Muslims need to understand, these terrorist organizations are fully created, funded, and operated by the CIA. People can say this conspiracy. Everybody on the ground knows that. Ask every Syrian. Why? Because, for 10, 12 years, these factions just attacked the rebels and killed Muslims and tortured Muslims, and every anti-Islamic thing in the world, they've done it. You see what I'm saying? Left the regime. So that's how the Americans aborted this real revolution that happened in 2011. And then after that, basically the regime stabilized, and the rebel groups, bit by bit, they were tamed. Now, when I say tamed, look, these rebel groups has 98% sincere people. You need to understand that. But see, people want to do something, and Turkey is enabling that, but they're funneling their energy in a specific way. For example, this is Ahmed al-Shara. This is Abu Muhammad al-Julani. What did he basically? What was the command basically after entering Damascus? He says nobody should touch any government building. Why? Because people are going to uncover the secrets of these relationships on paper. They're going to uncover lots of stuff, the secret relationship between the Assad regime and Israel, and the Assad regime and the Americans and then blah, blah. Everything will be uncovered. That's why Israel just bombed also certain buildings in Damascus just recently. Why did they have to? They bombed even the passport and the whatever basically building. Why? There are things that they're scared. There's no weapon depots. This is Syria as a country. You can't accuse them like you accuse Hezbollah. Oh yeah, they have weapons in this building. No, this was actually the passport building. The other building was blah blah building. They bombed government civilian buildings. Why? Because there's secrets that they don't want them to be uncovered. The Americans are going to look bad. The Israelis are going to look bad, and they're going to create awareness for people, which inshallah we need to build anyway. You see what I'm saying? What did he say? Don't touch these buildings. Oh, that's an issue. Number two, he's willing to basically cooperate with the Prime Minister of Bashar al-Assad to come and do a transition, for him to lead a transition to the rebels. I'm like, bro, what are you doing here, man? This is a big proof that he's a CIA agent. He's an American agent. And see, most of the Syrians know that. Maybe our viewers in North America and whatever, they don't. But ask any Syrian. Everybody knows this Julani guy is an American agent. Everybody knows. He led his group to basically just fight the rebels for 10 years. People need to understand that. Okay? Look at CNN. He had an interview with CNN, for God's sakes, and they tried to make him as if like he's a gentle, rebel hero now. Look at how manipulative they are. But this is the problem. We need to see and read between the lines. We don't trust any terrorist organization because we know they're all created by the Americans. You understand? Now, the biggest thing is basically how did the rebels go from just like having a tiny part of Idlib to now taking over the whole country within a few days? How come the Assad regime, even forget about Iran and the Iraqi militias and Hezbollah and the Russians, okay? Why did the Assad regime not protect itself? It has been bombing people with barrel bombs for years and years and years. You know what I'm saying? So the Assad regime was told by the United States, you're done. If you're going to resist, we're going to basically now, you're going against our interests. So he says, look, I submit. He says, this is what you're going to be doing. We're going to get the Russians to sponsor you and your family. You pick up basically all your gold and your monies. And all the crew basically that are khalas done, we cannot use them anymore because they're so bloody, and just leave Syria and we'll take care of the rest. Is the Americans going to basically leave Syria now to the rebels? No way on earth. People need to understand that.
So what's next for the rebel groups?
This is the biggest question. This is the million-dollar question. The rebel groups, as I said, basically have been cultivated by Turkey. There's lots of sincere people, 98%, let's say. But those 2% will get the sensitive posts. You see what I'm saying? Why was the Americans from day one, since this rebel advancement, have said, and Erdogan has been saying the same thing, that we want musalaha wa tam. So both the Americans and Turkey and even Britain right now, and everybody's now saying this, but it's, the ones who started, the Americans in Turkey and Erdogan and the foreign ministry and so forth, they said we need national reconciliation. What does that mean? That means basically people need to forget what happened the last 50 years and shake the hands of people who have blood in their hands, but maybe not too much, but some blood, or loss of blood, but it's not like extravagant blood like the Assad family, for example. And then they're going to keep the Alawites, and they're going to create a regime that is secular from one perspective. Number two, subservient to American interests. Period.
Is it going to be one regime running Syria, or would Syria be split into
this is the
pieces?
second biggest
and who's
question.
going to be making those shots?
Exactly.
Like, will the rebels have a future? Like, I'm trying to understand. Will the rebels have a future if it's one Syria, and or not? And what about if it's Syria split? Will they have a future? Like, what does that look like for the different groups?
Well, look, at the end of the day, there will be Sunni part. Like the possibility of keeping Syria together as one unit is a possibility. Yeah, it's a possibility. Let's just, whatever, we'll give it a number. Let's say 30%. But a bigger possibility is Syria becoming more of a federation where there's autonomous regions, right? And really what we see on the ground right now, there's 4 autonomous regions. One for the Kurds, they already have it, northeast, and one for the Alawites on the Sahel, on the coast, the west coast, from Ladiqiyah to Tartus. That is all. That's why everybody traveled there. The Alawites in Homs, they left to the Sahel. The Alawites from the Rif Hama and Rif Homs. Rif basically is the countryside. They went there. Even Damascus, when people were pulling up, they went there.
And the rebels did not move that direction.
They did not move until now. They did not move. They entered a little bit. Basically, there was no wars. There was no fights. There's nothing. Yeah. Even though these were the same people that basically tortured people and killed people for a long time, there are lots of criminals and terrorists within that area. And the rebels are saying, well, let's make peace with everybody and so forth. Well, okay, fine, but at least take the criminals to court. Everybody wants peace. Who would not accept peace? But anyway, so they have the Alawites, you have the Kurds, and in the south there's the Duruz. Okay, that's a different sect. And then you have basically in the middle you have the Sunnis. So there will always basically be some rebel role, right? You understand that. But which rebels? As I'm saying, what's going to happen is basically secular leaders who are already basically have ties to the United States will take over even either all of Syria if Syria is kept united, or the Sunni larger middle area. You see what I'm saying? Definitely the third option is Syria breaks up immediately into civil war and then gets separated into 4 countries. Okay, 3 or 4 countries depending. At least definitely one for the Kurds, one for the Alawites. Definitely, the Druze might basically also, maybe Israel might even come in and take over the Druze area. Whatever. So it could be a buffer zone basically. The Israelis might also prefer having the Druze little state there too. So these are the 3 possibilities. Either the country breaks up, or basically becomes a federal, confederate, basically type of rule with some autonomy to the provinces based upon these sects, or Syria gets kept as a one unit. The most likely is the federation. Very unlikely right now, basically, for it to break up immediately. But the breakup might happen in the future. This is why the United States, again, is formulating the Middle East for it to implode and to break up.
Oh,
They broke up Sudan. They broke up Libya. They broke up Yemen. They broke up Iraq. They broke up. What is it? It's just continuous breaking up of the Middle East. This is when the Americans say we need to redraw the Middle East. This is what they mean. Sykes-Picot was not granular enough. Why? Because they want to weaken us even further and further and further. This is what's happening. We've been played, but nobody wants to say this stuff. Erdogan cares about Turkey. And the establishment of Turkey only cares about Turkey. Like, even if Erdogan basically cares as an individual, as a human, about the Muslimin, it doesn't matter.
He has to look after his national interest.
It's not about that. He's forced to do so.
Yeah.
He accepted that this is my role. My role is to basically serve the Turkish establishment. And the Turkish establishment basically said, look, we need to align with American interests, otherwise we'll be in trouble. This is the Turkish theater. People need to stop basically making Erdogan as if he's the next caliph or the next Khalid bin Walid or the next Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is gibberish.
We see what's happening with Palestine, how he's enabling, actually enabling the genocide.
Disaster. But that's why some ignorant basically people who live in their own, literally fantasies, and they think emotionally. There's no real, thinking on the ground that's based upon facts. Turkey enabled the genocide. Yeah, definitely enabled it. A'udhu billah.
Sheikh, going back to Iran, Hezbollah that they pulled out, is one thing now. Does this mean an end to the Syrian Crescent project that Iran was working on?
Yeah, definitely. I think basically the fight between, or the competition between Iran and Israel won. This is what people don't understand. This is like we spoke about, like Israel through the Americans have won this war. Hezbollah, after what happened in Syria, Hezbollah has zero future. As a militant group, really, it's probably is going to get sucked into the Lebanese army. We'll see what's going to happen there. Basically, we already spoke about some of the predictions, but kicking Iran out of Syria is a big thing. It's a big loss for the Iranians, without a huge doubt. Look at their boys on social media screaming their lungs, like little babies. So it's and this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does to those who are zalimeen, oppressors. The Iranians are oppressing the Sunnis inside Iran. They're oppressing the Sunnis in Iraq. They're oppressing Sunnis in Syria. They're supporting the biggest butcher maybe in the last century, which is the Assad regime. They're oppressing the Muslims in Lebanon. They're oppressing the Muslims in Yemen. They're oppressing Muslims everywhere. You think basically Iran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will curse Iran, the Iranian regime. The Iranian Muslims in Iran are our Muslim brothers and sisters. They also are suffering. Even the Shia are suffering inside Iran. Maybe definitely to a lesser extent than the Sunnis. But this Iranian regime and this Iranian project, this is the so-called non-Islamic revolution of 1979, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never basically support, because it's full of oppression from day one.
Sheikh, you mentioned all these possibilities for what can happen for Syria. There are people who say that, because of this revolution and everything that happened, Bashar al-Assad is gone. There's a chance that this can become like another Egypt, or another Libya becomes anarchy, or Egypt where they create a new government, however way they split up, federation, non-federation, and all of a sudden things break down and another tyrant comes in.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what do we have to say about that? Is that necessarily where Syria can go? What's the options here? So
we just spoke about the 3 options, right? The 3 options is federation, a federated type of country. Or the country could stay basically as one unit, with maybe like a Senate and a Congress and so forth, and sadly the third option is civil war with breakup if you're going to break up the country, they will have to do civil war, because everybody's going to fight for their borders. So there will be a fight. Sadly, there'll be a loss of bloodshed until each each sect takes their areas.
Even if, let's say, there's a fighting part, that's the third option. But let's say on the other two options, can there not exist a possibility, like these other countries, how a tyrant can come in and just exploit the people again? Or is this
that's a given. Like anybody who thinks that the Islam and the Muslims will reign over Syria because of this revolution, they're mythical. We cannot delude our ummah. The United States has the upper hand on Syria and has the upper hand over all factions. They pushed out the Americans. They bombed the Iraqis when they tried to come in. The Israelis and them, with American permission, smashed Hezbollah to get it out of Syria. They kicked out the Assad regime. They have full control over the rebels, and they have control over the Kurds. And they are aligned with Turkey basically in how Turkey is going to play within that Syrian theater. So there's no way on earth that Islam is going to rule Syria or the Muslims really are independent. Neither independence nor Islam will rule Syria. This is a fact. What's the possibility? 0%. And I bet anybody 0%. As a result of this revolution, 0%. I'm not saying in the future. Inshallah, in the future, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the Muslimin their real independence from the colonial West in the whole Muslim world. But this revolution, I'm telling you, is fully orchestrated by the United States, which is why the Assad regime was told to just not resist, let the rebels basically come in, and that's what happened. There was no resistance. Okay, the rebels are sincere, but they don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, the Assad regime had to be told by the United States, you're done, you're expired. You have two choices: either get killed by the rebels, we can arm them to smash you to pieces. Or you can make it easy for us and easy for yourself. You just leave. We will escort you out. We'll make a plan for you to leave, and you just let your army basically implode very quickly. So the rebels can take over easily. So the Assad regime basically it's not a choice really. This was just like an imagination of a choice. This is what people need to understand. This is what happened in Syria. All these deals happened in the last few years. To orchestrate this, and the Americans orchestrated this whole thing.
Sheikh, now that we understand the reality of how things work, right? There's backroom deals, there's leverage, there's power, there's all this thing. America's positioning, how they play with other nations. I mean, what should others do? Like, for example, subhanAllah, I was listening to in the Grand Umayyad Mosque, for example, the people were, Jolani was speaking, and he was saying that, because he seemed to he was positioning himself as he's reinvented himself, as you mentioned, CNN is doing that as well. And he mentioned that, we want to make Syria a country for everybody. Now, him or anyone else, what should the people who are trying to get into power do? Like, if America is a strong nation, shouldn't they play the game at the end of the day of, if they want to make their country better, they can't just go against American interests directly. They're going to have to find a way to work within the interests and play the game, or they just don't play the game. Like, what should happen?
Look, I understand.
Like, Turkey is playing the game. This group's playing the game. What's wrong with them playing the game?
The most important thing that the Syrian people need to do right now is to make sure they have the spirit. Like, the best thing about this revolution, which is amazing, okay, is that the spirit of confrontation of evil, the confrontation of oppression have been built in every Syrian man and woman and child. They need to maintain that, and basically the minute they sense any despotic, authoritarian, tyrannical rule by anybody, that person needs to be crushed in Syria immediately. This mindset is what can create of the Syrian people the best nation on planet Earth. And by the way, any nation that has that will become the best nation in the world. That's number one. Number two, they need to understand that this oomph that they have, this power for sacrifice, is fully tied, and they know better than us, with Islam. So they have to do lots of da'wah to cultivate these ideas in all of the Syrian people. Kurds, not Kurds, Sunnis or Shia, everybody. Number three, they need to work hard to build a very strong Syria, because nobody's going to give you independence. Independence is taken, not demanded from anybody. Do you understand? These are the three things that the Muslims in Syria needs to do. And we know basically, sadly, that the ones who are going to be in office will be if they're just in the front end, basically as a figure, as an image, they might be okay people. They might be good people. But we know for a fact that the people who really are holding the power in the new Syrian nation is going to come up, whether it's federated or one piece, will be people who are subservient to American interests. Period. Period. It's a challenge. I'm not saying this to basically depress people. I'm saying it because we have a problem we need to solve. And we shouldn't be surprised if basically the people, people are speaking about Riyadh Hijab to become the prime minister or interim prime minister, whatever it is. Well, this guy was a Ba'athi leader and was a prime minister during Bashar al-Assad's rule, for God's sakes. They're bringing the same faces. Again, they just clean him up a little bit. Oh, he defected at the beginning of the revolution, blah, blah. You're going to see lots of people, even if Riyadh al-Hijab, let's say, he defected early on. Let's say he had good intention. Let's say he was a person who did tawbah, ya akhi. They're going to bring up the other people. They're going to bring the evil people. Evil people only put evil people in power. For example, I'm going to speak again about the Atlas family. Specifically, Mustafa Atlas and these big generals in the army who were super duper in cahoots with the Alawites and the Americans. And the French. Where did they go? They went to France after the beginning of the revolution. Why? Because they're good people, bro. They're playboys. They're this. They're that. They're drug dealers. But they went because now they know the regime was burnt. Now they're hedging their bets. They're like, okay, now we need to leave. We'll come back to Syria as the emperors when such arrangement happens. This is what people need to understand. People who have blood on their hands, people who were in cahoots with the Alawi Assad regime, we should never, ever, as Syrian people, give them a single position of influence in the whole country. Period. If we do that, we're going to be able to really basically, the Americans might have control, but their control will be fragile. The Muslims in Syria need to understand that it's doable to be able to make an independent Syria. But there's prerequisite steps to get there. And the first step is awareness of your environment, awareness that the Americans are still in control. If you don't think the Americans are in control, why would you even try to solve anything? So this is not to depress anybody. This is to actually push the Syrians to understand the problem real well so they can solve it and face off with it. Do you understand?
I know you mentioned this earlier, but I want to make sure this is clear and you can articulate this because we said a lot. There's so many information. People are drinking from a fire hose.
Today was big.
And so when, let's say, Turkey's making moves for their, they have a thing that they want to make sure that they don't get harmed from the Kurds. They have their own strategic, initiative.
Yes.
But the Americans have their own initiative, and now Turkey is moving in a certain direction. Is it necessarily that, and I'm speaking Turkey just as a random example, but just countries in general, isn't it the case that there's going to be a stage while the people are building their mindset that someone has to play the game? Like someone has to play the game of, let me get myself to a little bit nation to a better position while having to dirty our hands a little bit because we're not fully independent.
Yeah.
Like, is there room for that? Like, I'm trying to understand that. Like, do we? Because I know some people are like black and white. This is not possible.
Yeah.
This and that. Like, what do you say about
I
that?
disagree with those who basically make it black and white. I'm not here condemning Erdogan. I'm actually, to be honest, I even basically, people know, I told my students, Turkish students, to vote for Erdogan in the last election. We had to choose between the CHP, which are the Kemalists, secularist Kemalists, versus Erdogan. We voted for Erdogan. If I was Turkish, I would have voted for Erdogan. I told my students to vote for him, and they did. So I'm pro-Erdogan from that perspective. Why? Because I understand his sentiment is Islamic. I understand that he actually made Turkey way stronger than before. And I understand that basically emancipation cannot be done by myth, by imagination, by wishes. That you have to build your country first to be able to get to the finish line of emancipation, right? So I'm not anti-Erdogan, right? Even though he has lots of, he's done lots of things that definitely hurt the Muslimin and so forth, because he's in this position. Now, what's my advice to Erdogan? My advice to Erdogan, ya akhi, you've been in top of Turkey for the last, 20 years now, 22 years, if I'm not mistaken. 22 years. 22 years, you can change the whole demography of the country. Where's where's the Islamic thought processes that are built in the schooling system? Where is the blah blah? I understand maybe you can do it in the year 1, year 2, year 5, year 7. It's been 22 years. You've been able to deflect a coup against you, for God's sakes, and to cleanse the armed forces. How come you're not investing in making Turkey, or to the Turks in Turkey, yeah? Because the Kurds seem to be a little bit more religious, to be more religious so they can support you, so you can build this nation, right? I understand you have some UAVs and so forth, and you're building the fifth generation Khan fighter jet, and you have the military industrial complex basically did become better. But we need 10 times better. We need 100 times better. Can the Turks do it? Yes! But we need the will. You understand? So I'm not telling Erdogan go and start calling for Sharia and so forth. No. I want him to first build a strong Turkey. Because you can call for the Sharia and you're weak, you get smashed. He's like, what the heck does that mean? That's why do you think the Americans are basically splitting these countries? To make them
weak.
No, not just weak. Weak is a simple word. They want to make them, make them as a project for Islam not feasible.
So they're trying to make it inviable.
Yeah, inviable. Yes, basically. Exactly. If you cut them up into small little pieces, khalas. If we have everything like Kuwait and Bahrain, bro, you can't, Muslims, those Muslims today, they don't learn politics and economics and geopolitics and all that kind of stuff. They feel basically if they make dua and they have long beards and they're good Muslims and they put a topi and wear like maybe what I'm wearing and they memorize hadith and Quran, they're gonna fly. Yeah, Habibi, you'll never fly like that. The prophets never flew like that. The messengers never flew like that. The Sahaba never flew like that. You have to take the physical means and how to tame the world, and so you can secure for yourself the security and prosperity and peace. Those are taken by an effort, by a project, by human steps. The kafir can get them, and the Muslim can get them. Stop basically being falsely spiritual. This is what Umar al-Khattab called tawakkul. Which is fake reliance on God.
Sheikh, we've seen now that Israel has invaded the Syria kind of a buffer zone, and they're bombing specific locations. I saw a tweet, right? Alex Jones said that this is an opportunity for Israel to establish greater Israel. Some people are saying that Israel is benefiting more from this. Where do you see this going?
Look, at the end of the day, it is up to America, not up to Israel. People need to understand that Israelis are subservient to the Americans. Doesn't matter what happens. Look, you need to understand that in the United States, the Congress, both the House and the Senate, sure, there might be loss of Zionist influence, but people just appease the Zionists by empty talk. Like even Trump did it. You know what I'm saying? Even the last message he sent, people knew he was speaking to Netanyahu. One of his aides said, "Yeah, the message that Trump sent to the two parties, Trump made it seem a little bit more on Hamas, that they need to basically agree to the demands and then free the captives and blah blah blah." One of his aides basically told an Israeli newspaper, says, "Yeah, he actually also meant Netanyahu." Like you need to understand, there's the public faith. The Americans fool these Zionists. They fool them. They give him all the talk, and they give him support because the support that goes to Israel is in the interest of the Americans. And the minute it stops being in the interest of the Americans, wallahi, you'll never see a dollar going to Israel. That's how the Americans work. The Americans are very tough people. Okay, we need to say it as it is, basically. The Americans are intelligent and they're strategic. They know what they're doing. That doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes. They've done blunders in the last over 70 years, from a strategic perspective. But anyway, so right now, will the Americans allow them how much to take more? The Americans allow them to take a little bit more on the Golan Heights. That's how I see it. Would they take over maybe the Quneitra, maybe the southern province with the Druze and so forth? But taking over more than that, I don't think so. My prediction would be very, very unlikely. Okay, so 5%.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh.
Allah yabarak feek. May bless you.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. And everybody, there's a lot of things we spoke about. So share this video, like, subscribe, comment. We're going to talk more about these issues, and we're going to say the truth, no matter what the consequence is. This is what we're about. This is what Sheikh Usta is about. This is what the i3 Pulse is about. So if you want to continue with that and you love what we're about, subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode on i3 Pulse. Assalamu alaikum.
And don't forget, guys, like 95% of those who watch our videos on a regular basis are non-subscribers. So make sure you subscribe and click the bell button there to get all of our content, inshallah.